What's going on, everyone? Wesley Shoemaker, joined by Keenan Cummings. We have arrived at football season. Game week is here. We're excited. We know you guys listening are excited, and we have a fantastic Penn State preview episode. We are obviously going to get into what both teams we think have to do to win. We've got an interview with some folks that cover Penn State, and then we're also going to give you our predictions from our end. So, Keenan, here we are. Football season's here. I feel like we've been talking about this forever. Just kind of your general thoughts on what to expect this weekend. I know we're recording right now on Wednesday. The next 2 days, Thursday, Friday in Morgantown, are going to be absolutely crazy. I know your kid's school just got canceled, and McAfee's coming into town. Big Noon's coming into town. It feels like everything's going on in the next couple days, and life's to get crazy for everyone. But just your overall thoughts and the vibe you have heading into week one here.
Yeah, I think you can already kind of feel it, being around town, the atmosphere, it's starting to get a little bit of a buzz. I think by this time tomorrow, you can say we're taping Wednesday, by this time tomorrow, by Friday, this place is going to be nuts. This is by far the biggest game in Morgantown that I've covered since LSU came. I would say maybe Oklahoma, maybe, but it didn't have that
18-1.
Yeah, I don't feel like it's still even for what it meant. Like the time of the year was a little difficult.
Day after Thanksgiving, all that.
Yeah, this is up there with LSU for me, at least non-conference in terms of openers. Nothing I have covered compares to this. Even they went to play Alabama. Obviously that was a neutral site game, but in Morgantown, nothing compares. I don't think anything compares in general, really, to just the buzz. There's a lot of excitement about this West Virginia team. We'll find out whether that's founded or not, but there's a lot of excitement about the team. There's a buzz around town, and you give Mountaineer fans or West Virginia supporters any reason to be overly optimistic and excited about their football team, they'll take it. So I think it's going to be fun. I'm really excited to see how this game will go. We'll get into it a little bit, matchups, how we see it unfolding, but I'm just excited for the atmosphere. It's a big-time college football atmosphere. Morgantown's going to be in the spotlight. You mentioned it, the McAfee show, Big Noon, it just all this stuff. You feel like there's some other big games that are going to be happening Saturday, but in a sense, Morgantown's one of the epicenters of college football, for that day. And there's a lot going on here. And as Neil said earlier in the week, it's a good chance to showcase. And he thinks everybody, the city, the program, it's going to shine because of it.
Yeah, that showcase word, West Virginia, Morgantown, West Virginia will be a showcase city for college football this weekend. But let's get right into it, right? Penn State. Everyone wants to talk Penn State, Penn State, Penn State. So offensively, let's go there first. Obviously, they returned quarterback Drew Aller, who absolutely kind of had his way in this game last year. They returned their two top running backs, Katron Allen, Nick Singleton. And at least for me, that's where this team is kind of based out of. They want to run the ball. They're similar to West Virginia that they want to run the ball. Those two running backs are really, really good. Drew Aller, his best game of last season was against the Mountaineers in what was I believe, his first start, right? So there's some confidence that he's definitely carrying into this game. And so I think if you're West Virginia, it's how can you slow those three down? They've got that three-headed monster. Some folks in the Penn State camp have said that it seems like they want to run the ball with Drew Aller a little more. I'm not sure of his skill set, truthfully, so I can't really speak to that. However, that's their kind of living and dying by is those two running backs. And so if you're West Virginia, I think that's where it starts, is trying to stop those two guys.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting dynamic. You got this thunder and lightning on both sides, when it comes to the running backs. West Virginia obviously has C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White, and then they have Allen and Singleton. And I think, last year West Virginia, for the most part, did a pretty good job on those guys. I think if you go back and you watch most people predicting this game, or most people talking about this game, you thought those two running backs were going to run all over West Virginia. For the most part, they kept them in check. Really what impressed me last year is Drew Aller. He made the plays, and we've talked about this a little bit before. I think that was the difference in the game. Now, some of that, he was hitting guys that were open. Some of that was some yards after catch. I think 180 of those 325 yards were yards after the catch for Aller last year. So that kind of gives you an idea of how some of his receivers made some plays in that game, but he made the throws. He made them when they counted. This is going to come down. We've talked about this already. These are two teams that want to run the football. They're two teams that are built to run the football. Both teams have some pretty good wide receivers. Both teams have pretty good quarterbacks. Which quarterback makes the plays to me, and which team can at least minimize what the other team wants to do running the football? That's the matchup for me on both sides. Line of scrimmage and then quarterback. It sounds so simple to boil it down to that, but it is that to me in this game, because you saw last year that was the difference. Drew Aller outplayed Garrett Green. Garrett Green would be the first person that told you he didn't play well last year. I think he's addressed some of those shortcomings, and I expect him to play much better in this game.
Yeah, I think if you were to just, let's say, put Penn State's offense and West Virginia's offense side by side, you kind of get a similar build, right? Like you have the quarterback who can do things through the air and on the ground. You have two talented running backs on both sides. Each team has a tight end they want to use. For West Virginia, it's Cole Taylor. For Penn State, it's Tyler Warren, who he's their leading returning receiver. I know he was second in the team in receiving last year, but out of guys coming back, he leads them. And so that's similar to West Virginia and Cole Taylor, who led West Virginia in receiving. And then both wide receiver groups, you kind of have a lot of guys that you're just trying to figure out who is the guy. And so I think there's a lot of similarities you could draw for both teams on offense. But the one area I kind of want to get into is Penn State's offensive line, right? Like they had Olu last year at the tackle position, who was really good. I think they had, 2-3 guys go off from their starting offensive line last year. So that's a big number. And if you look at the guys returning, I know I did a breakdown a little bit of this earlier in the week, but
I appreciated that. I thought that was great.
Well, I appreciate the love, but there's guys that are experienced somewhat, but they just don't have a lot of snaps under their belt. And the dudes with more snaps, as far as PFF, Pro Football Focus, goes in their grading system, they just didn't grade out well. Now, by no means am I trying to say, oh, someone's a bad player because they don't grade out well. I think that's just ludicrous. But what I am saying is that, at least on paper, it seems like if West Virginia can kind of tear into this offensive line a little bit, if you're Eddie V, if you're Sean Martin, if you're these guys and can kind of try and get after Drew Aller, make him uncomfortable, especially in a road environment, then I think that's an area of emphasis, just because if you look at everywhere on Penn State's offense, that offensive line, it seems like, is the most unproven.
Yeah, absolutely. They lost a lot there last year. They're trying to fill in, their tackles. They have some guys returning on the interior, but I think that, West Virginia, again, played better than people expected last year up front. And I think that this group, I'm not sure if I'd go as far to say it's going to be better, but I don't see a massive drop-off coming. I think it's going to be another good group up front for West Virginia, especially if some of these young guys click. I think that's the battle, man, on both sides of the ball. If Penn State wants to run the football, can they effectively run the football? West Virginia wants to run the football. Can they effectively run the football? And it's going to start with Penn State's offensive line. They don't have the group they had last year to lean on, but it's Penn State. Let's not fool ourselves. They recruit good players. They're going to have good players ready to step in. And really up front, usually another year makes a wonder of difference.
Yeah, let's flip sides of the ball here, right? Let's go from when West Virginia is on offense and having to go against Penn State's defense. Just when you think of Penn State's defense right now, the one name that I think sticks out to everyone is Abdul Carter, right? So
Yep.
He's the guy, and there's no way around his talent. There's no way around everything that comes with him, the way he can produce. However, he did only have one tackle last year. It was a sack, in fairness, but for the most part, West Virginia held him in check. I know that if he lines up against Wyatt Milam, that's going to be a fun matchup to watch. Two guys who could get taken pretty early, depending on how you define early in next year's NFL draft. And so I think that's going to be the challenge for this West Virginia offensive line, that they also lost two starters, including their center, Zach Frazier, right? And so
that's a big loss.
Yeah, and then also on the other end is Danny Dennis Sutton. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And he had a lot of success last year. He had, I think, 6 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. So there's production on that defensive line for Penn State, and we know West Virginia wants to run the ball, and they successfully did it last year against this front, but they're going to have to prove that they can do it early and often, I think, on Saturday.
Yeah, and might have to do it a different way, too. If you go back and look at that game. Now, Zach Frazier was good in that game, but they don't have Zach Frazier this year. He was moving around the defensive tackles for Penn State last year. And, yeah, Brandon Yates is a very good player, for what he is. But he's a different type of player. So West Virginia's going to have to win that battle up front. I think they're going to have to protect. Obviously, Wyatt Milam, he gave up 2 or 3 sacks his first year. He hasn't given up sacks since. and he's gone against some good players. He went against some good players last year against Penn State and held his own. So I think that I'm not necessarily as worried there. You know, I think he's going to be able to take care of business. Yeah, you're going to get beat sometimes, but if you're going to put anybody on the line in those situations, you want it to be a guy that's projected to be a pretty high NFL draft pick next year. So I feel pretty good there. Now, you know, you look across, your other tackle is going to have to prove himself a little bit. He's not played this much in this kind of environment, and as you mentioned, Penn State's two edge rushers are pretty good. They're both going to be taking an NFL draft, and Nick Malone's going to have to be ready for that. You know, I think that's going to be a battle, but can they move them up front the way they did last year to run the ball? You know, you look at West Virginia's final numbers, they don't blow you away, but they were productive for what they were trying to do. The problem was West Virginia struggled to throw the ball with any consistency, especially in the intermediate parts of the field.
Yeah, I know we're going to get into kind of keys to victory a little later on, but my thing for West Virginia is that Garrett Green's going to have to be a runner. I know both of us last week when we kind of gave our predictions said we don't think he's going to have these designed runs as much, and I don't think there'll be designed runs. I think he's going to have to scramble a good amount if West Virginia is going to want to stay in this game. I'm not sure if you remember it, but I think there was at least once last year where he kind of scrambled to his right, and then he had to kind of cut all the way across the field just to get like 9, 10, 11 yards and get a first down. And so plays like that are going to be the plays to me that are kind of the difference, because that kind of just picks up a down when you think you might be getting off the field. So as far as this rushing attack for West Virginia, I think Green is obviously a part of it, but I think if they're going to want to have success this weekend, he's got to be a bigger part of it than we might expect going later on in the season.
I think more, like you said, it's the scrambling. I agree with that. It's when plays break down. You know, he's got to be able to make plays. That's the difference between him and Drew Aller. I'm not taking anything away from him. He's athletic for his size, but he is not Garrett Green. Garrett Green brings a different dimension there. You know, you're seeing a lot of buzz for Garrett in the last 2 weeks in terms of what he could do nationally. This is a showcase game to prove it. You know, what better chance to prove the improvements that you've made, not only as a rusher but a passer, than a game like this. You know, in a game like this environment, you know, this is a game that, you know, we can sit here and this game's not going to affect West Virginia's season. In the long run, it won't. But this is a program trajectory changing type of game. Now, you win this game, people are talking about West Virginia again. You know, it's not, you won't have to be begging for people to be talking about you at the end of the year. They're going to be talking about West Virginia. Now, granted, you got to take care of business against, you know, Albany and Pitt, but you go into the Big 12 3-0, you're ranked for sure. You don't have to worry about
probably in the top 15 potentially
ranked,
if you can go on the road.
Sure.
Pitt, yeah.
And you might be one of the favorites at that point, because I think a lot of people with West Virginia kind of want to see it to believe it, and that's where we're at. This is a massive opportunity, and I think that this team's going to come out ready to play. The question is it going to be enough? Because this is a very, very talented Penn State team. Yes, I know they lost pieces, but take a look. I cover recruiting. You know, I'm very in-depth with it. Look at their classes every year. That they bring in a lot of good players. You know, I do the feature, and it'll come out this week, looking at guys that West Virginia tried to recruit. Look at some of the names on that list. You know, it's some of their best players. So they restock. You know, they don't necessarily – you know, they don't have to rebuild, they reload.
Yeah, let's just some housekeeping from my end as far as other guys whose name you'll probably hear on Saturday from Penn State's defense. Kobe King, 59 tackles, 6 tackles for a loss last year. Kevin Winston, I think they call him KJ Winston up there, not entirely sure. 61 tackles, an interception, 2.5 TFLs. And then Jalen Reed, 46 tackles, 4 tackles for a loss, a sack, and 2 picks. So a lot of production, a lot of talent returning, and West Virginia is going to have to go up against that talent. So let's talk about keys to the game, keys to victory, kind of what West Virginia's pathway to victory is, right? So I'll go first here. For me, I know Neil said it earlier in the week. One of the things that, like, they've just got to be better on third down. I think in that third quarter, when this game kind of got away from West Virginia, they struggled really on third down. And then I know they had a couple fourth down shots they also failed upon. So that's one thing for me where they've just got to be better. I think they converted like 3 of 14, 4 of 14, or something like that last year. Not entirely sure on that number. It's not in front of me, but like that, you just can't have that, especially in this type of game. And also, before we kind of get in depth with players, it's controlling yourselves in the atmosphere. Like, you can't get caught up in this atmosphere. There's a lot of guys I know, especially Garrett Green, right, who are very emotional football players. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination, but I am saying that you have to keep that in check. You can't go try and have this late hit just to get a crowd up and it costs you 15 yards. You have to play within yourselves, play within your system. And I think all the coaches this week, whether it was Brown, Chad Scott, Jordan Leslie, all kind of had that same premise of we got to be who we are. And if West Virginia is who they are and they don't change just because there is more attention and the spotlight is on them, then they can give themselves a chance to win. But if they start trying to play emotional, kind of lose their heads, then things can kind of get a little bit dicey because you're just helping the opponent.
I agree with you 100%. And this is actually going to sound really odd because I'm going to take the exact opposite stance as you. They've got to play under control. They got to play within themselves, but you also got to feed off the environment. You know, you're at home this year. You got to ride that wave a little bit and really take it all in. I mean, there's nothing that you hear players talk about it all the time. There's nothing that helps the defense more than fans going nuts and feeding off that energy. I think you got to find a way to channel that and balance that. But I think that's important. You know, this game's at home. It's a lot different than going up to Happy Valley and have to play in a 110,000 seat stadium. So you got this game at home. Use it to your advantage. You know, fans are never. I said this on the message board earlier this week, and I didn't mean it disrespectfully at all to whoever asked the question. Fans aren't going to win anybody a football game. I'm sorry, it's not. I've covered games where the stadium's been empty and I've seen teams lose, and I've covered games where it's been packed to the brim and teams win. I mean, so like I don't think it's necessarily, but it can help. There definitely is a way that it can help. Ultimately, it's decided on the field, but I think that West Virginia can feed off that. You know, this is a great home environment. It's been for a long time. This can be the game. You know, break it out a little bit. People saw it against Pitt last year. That was at nighttime. That was a rival. Let's do it again against Penn State and see what you can do. And secondly, I've talked about it. But, you know, I want to see how West Virginia's defense performs in the back end. Penn State has some questions at wide receiver. They brought some good players in. They definitely have some good players to at least sort through in their mix of guys. Fleming, for one, transfer from Ohio State. But I think that West Virginia's secondary's got to prove it. You know, you invested – all of these scholarships, all this talent into these guys, and now it's time to show you can do it. And I think that's going to be critical. And then my last point is kind of the one that I keep harping back on. Who wins at quarterback? Who makes the most plays? Who puts their team in best position to win? It sounds so simple. You know, everyone wants to blame the quarterback for everything, wins or losses. I think this is a game where two teams are going to be evenly matched, and the quarterback that plays the best is going to give his team the best chance to win. And that isn't always the case. You know, sometimes the quarterback can play well and you can win in other areas, but I think in this game it's going to come down to that because both these teams want to play and stop the run, and which one is going to make the most plays. And I think Garrett Green has a more diverse toolbox to go into there. But as we saw last year, Drew Aller can really toss it around if West Virginia will let him.
Yeah, I think for me, when you talk about that quarterback, like who can be better, I think there's also some weight that falls on West Virginia's wide receivers. If Penn State gets physical, if Penn State's lining up to blitz and they're going one-on-one on the outside, can you win? Can you beat that physicality at the line of scrimmage? I feel like last year there was a lot of times where they just simply couldn't, right? And there's been talk of that. There's been talk of finding bodies that can do that. When it comes down to it, will these receivers be able to get open? Because Penn State's going to get after you up front. We just talked about that, right? Like there's no hiding from the fact that there's going to be times that they get after you, after Garrett Green. And so how does he make plays? Well, he extends the play with his legs, but then he's also got to find someone down the field. But if these receivers can't get open and they're blanketed, then it's going to be a long afternoon, just plain and simple. And then go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you've been talking all camp about how much better they are beating press coverage, getting open down the field. Prove it. It's time to prove it.
Yeah, and then for me, another thing is if you were to say, Wesley, West Virginia wins on Saturday, and you were going to say, give me a reason why, it's how they control the clock. I think that last year they were really good with time of possession, right? And so on a hot day, which it could be, right? It's really hot in Morgantown right now. It's probably going to be still pretty warm on Saturday. How do you kind of keep your defense off the field and let them make plays? And at the same time, how do you kind of tire out Penn State, right? Like this team's going to want to run the ball. They know that. And I think West Virginia was second out of all opponents against Penn State, only the only behind national champion Michigan and running the ball against Penn State in terms of yardage last year. So that's a big deal. And that was without Jaheim White, who didn't play. And that was with a quarterback who was still very raw and new and in a crazy environment, right? So West Virginia's going to run the ball. It's how effectively can they do that and control the game? And then, as we've said time and time again, another emphasis of fall camp, when they get the ball inside the 20, can they turn them into 6 instead of 3? And if they can do that, they're really going to give themselves a chance to win. But that's where the game will be won and lost, is time of possession. And when you get those opportunities down in Penn State's red zone, can you turn them into touchdowns and not have to settle for field goals?
Absolutely. And special teams and turnovers. That's game one. What team's going to come out and look the best? Which team's going to make a big mistake? Which team's going to capitalize if that big mistake occurs? West Virginia was unable to capitalize on several instances in that game last year that could have flipped the game. Might not have won them the game, but made it a lot closer. And they seem to fail in every single one of those. So can they make those plays this year? Because Penn State's been in a lot of games like this. West Virginia's been in a lot of games like this. You got to be able to show you can win these games. And I think it comes down to that. But let's go into it. Prediction time.
All right, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I'll take the beating. Listen, I like West Virginia in this game. I like them to make it competitive. I think this is going to be a very close game. But I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. I want to see West Virginia win this type of game at home. I think they're capable. I like this matchup. I think that last year I did not give West Virginia a chance to win that game in Happy Valley. I don't think I even had it within – I had it over the spread. To put it an example, I think this is going to be a very close game, 3 points. But I'm giving the edge to Penn State. I think they're a good football team. West Virginia, it's there for the taking. Show me that you can do it. I'm taking Penn State 31-24. I know, boo me if you want.
Well, they're going to be booing me too, I think, here in a couple minutes. But for me, this atmosphere is going to be great. There's no way around it. It's going to be jumping. The town's going to be jumping, and I think that's great. And I think that everything that comes with it is going to be awesome. The pageantry, right? This is what you want. You want to be able to have these big-time games if you're a college football program. You don't want it to be an anomaly. You want it to be a consistent thing. And as much as I think this team can really match up with Penn State, as you said, I've got to see them do it. I feel like there's been opportunity. You get the game at home, like that Oklahoma game, as we kind of started things off with, right? They had the chance there. Even go back to that LSU game, they get the touchdown, and then boom, LSU returns the kickoff, right? So prove to everyone that you can win these types of games if you're West Virginia. I think it's close late. I've got a similar score. I've got 31-27 Penn State. I think it's going to be a fantastic game kind of to the end. I think West Virginia, while they might lose, I think they're really going to turn some heads and compete with a team that let's be honest with ourselves. This game is you have to win this for Penn State. West Virginia, as cool it is that it's at home, they're playing with house money here, right? Everyone is expecting a team in Penn State that, with all we've heard since the offseason in this expanded playoff, is Penn State would have made the playoff every single year if there's been a 12-team playoff. Well, 12-team playoffs here, the Big Ten is expanded, and they've got Oregon, USC, all these new teams, right? How can they compete in that Big Ten? But they have to win this game too, because they're the number 18 team in the country. West Virginia is the unranked team, right? So if you're West Virginia, play loose, play with house money, because everyone is expecting the blue blood of Penn State to win. And I think that can be used to West Virginia's advantage, especially early.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's a good point, and I think that's going to help West Virginia. There's pressure on both these teams, but not nearly as much as West Virginia in this game. You have a chance to really kind of announce yourself to the college football world. If you felt disrespected all off season, even the end of last year, there's a lot of motivation here. It really took me a lot to kind of go with my head, because if you're here in town, if you're around the program, you just have a feeling that this team's going to pull it off. But again, show me. I'll be glad to be wrong, because when I picked my 9-3 projections, I picked if projections are correct. So we'll see.
Yeah, it could kind of help both of our projections of 8-4 and 9-3. But hey, if you made it this far, we do appreciate you listening. We will be back with you sometime Saturday. We don't exactly know when. We're gonna get you something post game Saturday, but please keep it locked on WVSports.com. We're pumping out content. We're doing the best we can. I know Keenan's busy. I know I'm busy starting grad school this week, and also stick around for this awesome interview that we have coming up next. So, anything else? You be getting out of here.
I think we're ready. We're ready to hop into this interview.
All right, well, we're going to kick into this interview. Once again, we do appreciate you listening. I'm Wesley Shoemaker, joined by Keenan Cummings. Keep it locked on all of our social media channels and the website, and this is the WVSports.com podcast. It is our pleasure to be joined by Marty Leap, who covers Penn State football, and he is here to answer our questions about Penn State ahead of Week 1's matchup between West Virginia and the Penn State Nittany Lions. So, Marty, just to start things off, just your overall thoughts on this weekend's matchup and kind of what things are like from the Penn State side of things. Obviously, we know what the vibe is like around Morgantown, things like that, but just the vibe you're getting from the State College side of things.
Yeah, I think this is a game where for Penn State fans, from people within the Lash building, that sort of thing, they know that while this is a game that Penn State's favored in, and at one point it was a double-digit favorite, they also know it's not a game where you can come and kind of screw around and expect to get out of there with a victory, right? I mean, West Virginia last year, there might not have been a team in the country who over-exceeded expectations more than they did, especially to start the season the way they did, coming up to Happy Valley and losing pretty handedly to still finish the year with, 8 wins, 9 wins, whatever it was, knocking on the door of the top 25. So it's definitely a team and a program with a lot of momentum coming into this game. And, you always expect a hostile environment in Morgantown. You throw in what the weather forecast looks like, and they know this is not going to be an easy game. But at the same time, I think it's a game people are excited for because for a long time with Penn State, this started in the late Joe Paterno years and then into the Bill O'Brien, early Franklin years, which with those years you kind of had to because the state of the roster with sanctions and everything. The non-conference schedule was always a joke. So the last few years, they renewed the rivalry with Pitt a little bit. Back-to-back years with West Virginia. They did a home-and-home with Auburn. They were supposed to have a home-and-home with Virginia Tech that got canceled because of COVID, and then that was supposed to be here in Blacksburg, and then Virginia Tech refused to come up to Happy Valley and play them the following year. But, and I'm sure most people listening to this in your end won't mind a little bit of a subtle punch at VT either. But, it's nice to have these games, especially in an expanded college football playoff where you suffer that non-con loss, especially against another power conference opponent. That's not the killer it once was. So to me, that gives you even more incentive to go out and schedule these games for the excitement of it. And it's a lot nicer to have Week 1 be at West Virginia as opposed to a lot of years where, it's Kent State or Bowling Green or whoever it may be. So I think there's a lot of excitement on a lot of ends. And, just looking at it from a football standpoint, you want to get tested early in the year, right? Because especially if you're a team like Penn State with playoff aspirations, you want to get tested early because it's going to show you like, hey, here's where we are good. Here's where we really need to improve, that sort of thing. So I think there's definitely a lot of excitement on a lot of different levels coming into this thing on Penn State's end.
Yeah, crazy to think you can play a regional game in today's world, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way conferences are going. But offensively, how much different is this team going to be from the team that West Virginia played last year? What do you see as the strengths out of this group?
It's definitely going to be different than what West Virginia saw when they played Penn State, but it's not going to be different than what West Virginia has seen. With Andy Kotelnicki, now the offensive coordinator, having come in from Kansas, obviously another Big 12 offense that Mountaineers fans and the defense are they know, and I'll be curious to see how that goes because on one hand, hey, Kotelnicki's got a bit of an advantage because he knows what he wants to do against his defense. But on the other hand, you think it probably goes the other way as well, where the Mountaineer defensive coaching staff, like, hey, we've seen this before. And now, obviously, and this no slight on Kansas because Lance Leipold has just done an amazing job there. The caliber of athlete that Kotelnicki will have to work with will be much different than what he had at Kansas. But yeah, I think it'll be much different from what you saw from Penn State last year. I expect more two-back sets with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. I expect Singleton to be a much bigger part of the passing game, which is something people have been calling for 2 years now since he got on campus. I also think you're going to see an offense that's built more towards player strength and not necessarily what a coordinator is looking to do. Mike Yursich, again, another guy Big 12 fans know very well, who I still think is a good offensive mind and a good football coach. One of the biggest issues with him, especially last season, was too much of here's what I want to do, and I'm going to try and force my players into this. And when that didn't work, that's when you saw some of the breakdowns with the Penn State offense, especially in the Ohio State and Michigan games that ultimately led to him being fired by James Franklin. One thing Kotelnicki has done since getting on campus, and from what I've seen, read, reviewed of his time in Kansas, even going back to Buffalo, is, yeah, I have my offensive scheme, my offensive mindset and philosophies, but here's what my players do well. I'm not going to overthink this. I'm going to build this around what my players do well. So I think you're going to see a lot more kind of quick hitters with the receivers, trying to get guys the ball in space, especially, like I said, with Singleton. Penn State has a couple deep threats at receiver that weren't totally utilized well last year. I think you're going to see them try and take the top off the defense a little bit more on Saturday. Well, weather permitting, I should say, with the passing stuff, because if they get the weather they're calling for, I don't think either team's going to be very interested in trying to sling the ball around. But I definitely think, like I said, it'll be much different than what you saw from Penn State last year, but not something that's foreign to West Virginia fans, because, again, with Andy Kotelnicki coming in from Kansas, it's an offense that the Big 12 is seeing a lot of, and I'm sure people in the Big 12 are not exactly upset to see Andy Kotelnicki leave Kansas either.
Yeah, West Virginia dealt with him firsthand a couple years ago.
Yeah.
He came out with a entirely different offense. He hadn't shown, did a lot of different things and kind of cut him up there. So we definitely know what you're talking about.
One other thing with Kotelnicki real quick. I remember I was actually at the Steelers and Packers game when Mike Yurcich was fired, and I saw it on my phone, and I texted my one buddy and said, I don't remember the guy's name off the top of my head, but please go hire Kansas's offense coordinator. Like that's who's going to fix this offense. And sure enough, that's what's happening. So
On the topic of the offense, though, one thing Keenan and I have kind of looked into as far as Penn State's returning production is the lack of that on the offensive line, and how there are returners there, but the vast experience from last year is gone. And so we've kind of looked at that as an area where West Virginia, if they are going to want to try and compete in this game and possibly win, they can try and do that with their defensive line and kind of getting after the Penn State offensive line. Obviously, you're way more in the know of the O-line situation for Penn State. What would you say that situation is, and do you think they are confident or still kind of trying to figure things out heading into week one?
I think they're confident, but you're a little uneasy. The interior offensive line, I think, will be great. You return Big Ione and Sal Wormley as your starting guards. Wormley has started something like 37 or 38 games in a row at this point. Ione played 8 or 9 games as a true freshman 2 years ago and played in every game last year. You have Cooper Cousins, who a lot of places are projecting as a freshman All-American who's going to rotate in. And you have JB Nelson, who was a starter last year before getting hurt, who's going to rotate in there as well. You feel really good about your interior. But those tackles, and, I think a lot of Penn State fans took for granted what they had in offense tackle last year, because you have Olu Fashion, who everybody knows Olu. And the kind of under-the-rated guy was right tackle Caden Wallace, who was picked in the 3rd round by the Patriots and looks like he's going to be the starting left tackle. So your tackles last year are both going to start at left tackle in the NFL as rookies. That's some really high-end tackle play. And I think that's where the concern comes in, because a left tackle, you're going to have Drew Shelton, who is going into his junior season as a true freshman in 2022. They wanted to redshirt him. Injuries piled up. He wound up having to start like this last 6 or 7 games, forget the exact number top man, including the Rose Bowl, and played extremely well. Last year, he took a step back. Some of that was injury, but they really need Drew Shelton to take that step forward. And a right tackle in camp, it's been a battle between Anthony Donka, who has kind of come out of nowhere. He had never played tackle before the Peach Bowl last year. And when Wallace didn't play the second half, he took over right tackle and played extremely well. He's now a redshirt freshman, but he's been banged up some in camp. And he will be battling with Nolan Rucci, who transferred in from Wisconsin, a former 5-star recruit whose dad was a letter winner at Penn State and was a member of the Patriots all-decade team in the 90s. So he hasn't put it all together at Wisconsin, but there's a lot of good genes there. Since coming to Penn State, has put on like 15 pounds of muscle, and there's some belief within the building that Wisconsin, didn't maximize him in the strength and conditioning program. So I think that's going to be the idea tackle. You need Drew Shelton to take a step, and between Rucci and Donka, if those two can combine to give you solid right tackle play, you'll be happy. But where they're really going to be concerned with them is going to be pass protection. I think Rucci especially is going to be just fine run blocking. If you go back and watch some of his film, Wisconsin he was, and what he does well, he is. The concern with Rucci is some of that bend and that first step to get into his pass set. And with Shelton, like I said, the kid has all the tools in the world. He was a 4-star recruit. He was at IMG for a while. He was a kid everybody wanted. He played really well as a true freshman, and then took that step back last year. And like I said, some of it may have been injury, but you really need him to take a step forward this year at left tackle. Honestly, other than Drew Alar, because as lazy as to say, almost any offense goes as far as the quarterback, especially with a quarterback this talented, the play of those tackles may decide where this season goes for Penn State offensively more than anything else. So they really do need between those 2 of them to take a step forward and step up. And if that happens, I think they'll be okay on the offensive line. Like I said, that interior should be really solid again, especially run blocking. But the tackles are definitely a concern. And, on the road, hostile environment, you get in that 3rd and long, the crowd's going to be pumped up. Those guys are going to pin the airbacks and go. It's going to be important, I think, for them to not allow West Virginia's pass rushers to have success early in this game, to build some momentum and confidence on their end, really get the crowd going on 3rd down. That's going to be something that's very important to watch.
You mentioned it, and last thing here offensively for Penn State, how big of a season is this for Drew? I know obviously you look at the numbers last year; they look pretty good, but I know just talking with people, obviously I talk with you about this. It seems like people kind of still need to see some stuff out of him.
Yeah, you mentioned the numbers. His overall numbers were very strong. 25 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. James Franklin has probably said that number 800 times this offseason. His completion percentage was around 60%. All good numbers for a first-year starter. Here's the problem. When they went to Columbus, 18 of 42, 191 yards, and only 1 touchdown. When they played against Michigan at home, 10 of 22, 70 yards. He threw an interception. He lost a fumble. If he repeats what he did last year numbers-wise, but let's say you take what he did against like a Maryland, who you're going to beat regardless, and flip that with what he did against Ohio State, he's viewed completely differently. Because if you play well, I feel, if he plays well against Ohio State and they still lose, you look at him a lot differently. You're saying, hey, you know what? Drew came out and did his thing. Ohio State's a damn good football team, man. But I think a lot of people within the building, fans alike, are sitting there saying, man, if he just could have made 1 or 2 big throws in those games, it could have been completely different. I go back to the Ohio State game. There was a 3rd down. It was early 3rd quarter. I think the score was like 6-3 at the time, where he had Keandre Lambert-Smith on a slant, and he was open, and Drew just threw it behind him. And if he catches it in stride, he may have housed it, and who knows where that game goes. So it's a big year for Drew. He's got to take a step forward. And I think a lot of that is going to pair well with Koldernicki, because last year there was too many times it seemed like they were too gun-shy with him, which is wild, and probably to you guys, because that West Virginia game, he came out, and I remember my one buddy here, I was watching it with that throw, that 72-yard touchdown to Lambert-Smith, like the second play of the game. We're like, man, that was like Mahomesian, rolling out, not even planting your feet, just flicking it. And then after that game, they got super conservative, and it was weird to see, where against an opponent of that quality, you weren't afraid to let him sling it around. But then they seemed to go into a bubble, and it was almost like his confidence got hurt from that, and he never recovered. So I think it's a big year for him, obviously, with NFL aspirations, because the kid's got all the talent in the world. I think improved wide receiver play, because their wide receiver play last year was absolutely atrocious. Improved wide receiver play will go a long way for him, and I think Koldernicki's offense is going to help a lot as well. But if he can take a step, which I think they expect him to, and especially if he can just trust that arm, I almost wish he had a little bit more of that Brett Favre of just, I'm going to chuck it, and if it gets picked off, whatever, I'll make up for it next time. Because when you've got an arm that strong, you've got to trust it, and you got to understand you're going to make mistakes, but at the same time, you're liable to throw a 70-yard bomb at any point. So I think if they kind of unleash him a little bit more at that, that'll go a long way. But Drew has to be better when it matters most, because his 2 worst games last year were the 2 most important games of the season. And, a lot of people around Happy Valley will tell you last year was a 2-game season. They'll tell you that this year's a 1-game season because they don't play Michigan. And in a lot of ways, that's not completely false. And you've got to bring it in those 2 games, and he just simply did not. So you need to see the improvement against the better opponents. I think Saturday will be a good test of that, because his track record on the road last year outside of the Maryland game was not great. Even when they went to Illinois, he was only 16 of 33, little over 200 yards, didn't throw a touchdown. So, his track record on the road hasn't been great. So I think Saturday will be a really good test for him against a good team on the road to open the season, a chance to take a step or 2 forward like he really needs to do coming off last year.
On the flip side of things, though, when you're speaking about Penn State defensively and going up against this West Virginia offense, I think last year West Virginia rushed for almost $150 against Penn State, and I think it was like the second most rushing yards they gave up all year, only to Michigan, which I think we all know what Michigan was last year. So add in Jaheim White, who didn't play in last year's game, and this kind of 3-headed monster, if you will, between him, C.J. Donaldson, Garrett Green. And so obviously Penn State's got Abdul Carter, got the Sutton kid on the outside. Where do you think Penn State can kind of exploit West Virginia when trying to stop the run?
I think a big part of this game, and it's going to be Penn State's defensive line against West Virginia's offensive line. I know from what I've read and researched, it seems like West Virginia brings back a decent amount up front, but you still lose two key guys off that with Zach Frazier and with Nestor, two really good players. Penn State's defensive line, in my opinion, is probably one of the 2 or 3 best in the Big Ten. Michigan still is the best defense line in the conference, in my opinion. And after that, it's probably between Penn State and Ohio State. They're very deep at defensive tackle. They have 5 guys defensive tackle that they firmly believe are going to play on Sundays. And defensive end, you mentioned Abdul Carter and denied Dennis Sutton. Amin Vanover is another kid to watch there, who Vanover, if you go based solely off of percentage of snaps that were disruptive, he's been one of the best players on this defense the last 2 years, and he's going to have the expanded role this year. I think what's going to be key, because this is something that has hurt them at times in the past. Now, this was a Manny Diaz defense that was a lot more aggressive on third down than Tom Allen typically is. One thing that has hurt them the last 2 years, as great as these defenses have been, on third and long against running quarterbacks, they can get themselves into trouble where the pass rushers come too far upfield. The middle of that field's wide open. The guy tucks it and gets 10 yards and a first down. Obviously, that is something that Green's going to look to do. That's something Green is very good at. They cannot let that happen. I think, honestly, the biggest thing for Penn State in containing this running game is going to be Garrett Green. I'm confident they can stop C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White, and that's not a knock on them. I just think this rush defense is still going to be really good. Penn State lost some guys off that defense last year, but this front seven is still phenomenal in my opinion. So I think they'll be okay there. I think the defensive line will be able to control the line of scrimmage. But if you start breaking down, letting Green run around, and one thing that could be key to watch there, as weird as it may sound, because the guy might be the most talented kid on the roster, is going to be Abdul Carter, because this will be his first game playing defensive end full time. So does he get over anxious on third down, thinking sack, fly up the field and leave that lane? When they're running read options, where Carter's responsibility is different at defensive end than it was at will linebacker in the past, does he, just out of habit, not watch the quarterback there and get sucked inside and potentially open up that lane on the outside for somebody to run it, So, excuse me, I think that will be a low-key something to watch, will be how Abdul plays in his first full game at defensive end. But, yeah, I think when it comes to stopping the West Virginia running game, because it's one of the best they're going to see this year, it's going to come down to that quarterback run, because if they can contain Garrett Green, I think they'll be okay, because I would take this defense, this front seven when healthy, up against almost any rushing attack in the country. I think it's still that good. But like I said, in the past, they've had issues with these running quarterbacks. So I'll be curious to see how Tom Allen attacks that too. Do you maybe on third and long look to do a bit of a spy situation potentially? I don't think that'd be a bad idea, especially if, again, to go back to the weather, you get the weather they're calling for. I'm sure West Virginia is not going to be super inclined on third and long to look to throw the ball down the field where things could go wrong in this weather. So did that maybe, if you are Tom Allen, like I said, put a spy on him, something like that. But I think if they can contain Garrett Green, they're going to be okay. If they don't, it could be a long day for this defense.
You mentioned the front seven. What's the back end look like this year? I know that they had some turnover, but they added some good players too.
Yeah, the back end it's going to be. I'll be curious to see how it works out, because there's a ton of talent, but a ton of question marks. I think this safety room, other than Ohio State, probably the best in the Big Ten. KJ Winston's got a real shot to be a first-round pick. Jalen Reed might be the most important player on this defense, because Tom Allen's base is a 4-2-5 with a third safety, so Reed's basically playing safety and Sam linebacker. And Zakee Wheatley's another guy they expect to play on Sundays. But behind them, there's not much depth there at safety, proven depth. They lost King Mack in the portal to Alabama, which was a sneaky big blow because he would have played a lot. And then at corner, everyone knows the names. Kalen King, preseason All-American last year. Johnny Dixon. Daquan Hardy got drafted by the Bills. But I think the cornerback room, it's a lot of question marks, but as crazy as it may sound, I think the potential is there for it to be better than last season, largely because King was a complete disappointment last year. Like, I'm not trying to pile on the kid at all. And to his credit, from what I've seen, it looks like he bounced back and had a really strong preseason with the Packers. He was just an extreme letdown last year. He was a preseason All-American, and in their biggest games he was the guy teams would target. Against Ohio State, he shadowed Marvin Harrison Jr., and albeit it's Marvin Harrison Jr., but he got torched. Like, at some point, if you're that good, you've got to step up and make a play, and he didn't. So you mentioned guys that brought in A.J. Harris, a former top 100 recruit from Georgia, who has been described as a dog by people in the program. I think they are extremely high on him. I think they view him as that true shutdown number one corner. He's going to start. Opposite him will be either Cam Miller, who has played a lot of football for him in the last 2 years, or Jalen Kimber, who transferred in from Florida. And Kimber's film at Florida and some of the levels, like top of the level stats, didn't look pretty on the surface. But if you go back and watch some of the tape, I don't know what Florida's defensive coordinator was trying to do at times last year or what their safeties were doing, but there were a lot of times where it looked bad on Kimber because he would hand a guy off in coverage and the safety wouldn't be there. So Kimber has really impressed in camp. And I know coming into camp, the expectation was for Harris and Miller to be the starters, and Kimber's probably equal at worst with Miller at this point. And I think that's more of a testament to what Kimber's done, more so than Miller struggling. So I think they feel good about the corner. Elliott Washington, Zion Tracy, two other young guys back there who are going to see some time this year, who they're very high on, who, more names for down the road. But if they had to go to them, they feel comfortable going to them. I think a big part of it is Terry Smith, the cornerbacks coach, is probably the best coach on this roster in terms of identifying and developing talent. Since he's been the cornerback coach starting in 2014 when Franklin first got to Penn State. Penn State's had more cornerbacks drafted under him than they had literally the previous 25 or 30 years before that. The guy knows what he's doing. He's great at developing talent. So that's part of it as well, where you really just trust Coach Terry to do his thing. But yeah, it's some uneasiness there because of the lack of experience. And I think that's where, again, first game on the road, hostile environment, you get a little not feeling great about it, but the talent is definitely there. And ultimately, you would much rather take your chances with the talent that maybe will have some, bumps along the way as they learn than the kids with the lower ceiling who may have the more experience. And that's also why I think bringing Kimber in the portal also was so big, because he is that veteran. He's played 2 years of Georgia, 2 years of Florida. He's played a lot of football in the SEC. The guy's got a lot of great game experience. I think that's going to be a great asset for these young cornerbacks to have as well. Even when he's not on the field, just his mind and being able to, help these guys read things, pick up on cues from the offense, that kind of stuff, I think will be big too.
As far as let's go to Saturday, right? So keys to victory for Penn State, and then two-parter here, Marty. If you have to give us prediction, score included, what would it be?
I think the keys to victory is just play a clean game, weather that storm early, the typical road game in a hostile environment kind of thing. And again, to go back to the defense, don't let Green beat you with his legs. If they do those things, I think they're going to be okay. I will be curious to see how aggressive they are on offense. And if they are aggressive, you want to hit on those shots. But again, if you get, torrential downpour, you're probably not looking to do that. But I think just play a clean game. Don't turn the football over. Weather that early storm, especially if, let's say, West Virginia receives the opening kick, goes down and score, ride that out. You can't let that snowball on you and contain Garrett Green. I think they'll win the game. I think that's what it'll take for them to win the game. If I had to make a pick, I think it's going to be close. I'm in the camp. I still think Penn State wins, but last I saw the line was 8.5. I don't know if it's moved at all because I know
I think that's what we saw it as today too.
Yeah. Yep. I know in the last week it's come from about 10.5 or so down, but at 8.5, I'm picking West Virginia to cover. But I think Penn State would win. Give me 27-20. I think they pull it out. I don't know if it's a game where maybe West Virginia scores late to get the backdoor cover, or if it's just close the whole way through and Penn State kind of hangs on. Kind of anticipate that more. But yeah, I'll say Penn State wins it by a touchdown, but I'll take West Virginia to cover.
Yeah, I think we all kind of feel the same way. I think it's going to be a close ball game, and really might just come down to mistakes and who can really capitalize on mistakes.
Yeah. I think anytime you have two teams of this caliber, I mean, like I said, Penn State's a preseason top 10 team. West Virginia is probably one of the best. Or is West Virginia preseason AP top 25 or no?
They're right outside of it.
I thought they were right outside.
Received votes, but didn't quite crack the top 25.
That's what I thought. I just want to make sure before I said it, I was right. But no, probably, as I say, probably one of the best teams not in the top 25. So, these are two teams that have aspirations to, I mean, you guys know more than me in West Virginia, but I've assumed with what they brought back and everything that they think they're capable of winning the Big 12. Especially with the new makeup of the Big 12, right? And you win the Big 12, you go to the college football playoff. So I don't think it's a stretch to say these are two teams that think they're capable of making the college football playoff this year. One of the beauties of the 12-team playoff is, on West Virginia's end especially, that's probably something you wouldn't have said a lot of years. I mean, Penn State obviously has been on the doorstep for almost a decade now, just right there, foot halfway through the front door and just can't quite make it in, it seems. But, I think it'll be a great game. And like you guys said, two really good football teams, whoever either makes the least mistakes or is able to capitalize on their opponent making mistakes, I think is probably going to be a very deciding factor.
Well, I know we're pumped. Keenan and I were talking about that today, how the vibe in Morgantown is just kind of the electricity is starting to build, which it's fun. The football's back, certainly this time of year. And it's a good showcase game kind of for college football to get one of these regional rivalries, one of these kind of big time games going, and week one of the season is just a perfect stage. So we certainly appreciate you taking the time, Marty. For everyone who doesn't know,
Thank you, Marty.
Marty Leap joined us. Give him a follow on Twitter if you would. And if you made it this far, we do appreciate you listening, and we all look forward to Saturday. So thank you for listening, and this is the WVSports.com podcast.